Africa Science Dialogue, closing the gap between science and society.
Every single year, the world is producing hundreds of millions of tons of plastics, almost 500 million tons of plastics. A lot of that, 75% or thereabouts, goes into waste, goes back into our environment as waste. Now, plastics take about 450, 500 years to completely biodegrade. And even then, most of these small particles of plastics will keep coming back to us. One of the earliest documented developers of plastic, inventor Alexander Parks, invented these in 1855. That's 170 years ago. That can therefore mean that the earliest invented plastics are still with us somewhat. Whatever was thrown out of a moving car window at the time is probably with us. And to talk about this and to tell us exactly what can we do to deal with this plastic menace, I have two scientists with me in studio. With me is Dr. Bridget Mutuma, a PhD, a research associate in the Department of Chemistry at the University of Nairobi. Dr. Mutuma has extensive postdoctoral experience in nanomaterials, sensor technology, and energy storage systems. Her research interest is in the development of multifunctional hybrid nanostructures, as well as plastic waste-derived carbon nanomaterials for use in sensors, photocatalysis, energy storage, and conversion systems. She's presently supervising several postgraduate students in the field of material chemistry, and she has mentored numerous postgraduate students. Also with me in studio is Mr. Peter Mwiro, my namesake and an environmental and analytical chemist based at Kirinyaga University. Mr. Mwiro is an avid golfer, by the way. He has research interest in pollutant fate and transport mechanisms, environmental impact assessment, and quality management. He's a certified professional mediator, quality management professional, and EIA and EA expert, blending scientific expertise with sustainability advocacy. His research focuses on microplastic pollution along the Kenyan coast, contributing to the African Initiative for Scientific Excellence project at University of Nairobi, and he's been part of the Coastal Observation Lab in a box under the Vulnerability of Kenyan Coastal Ecosystems International Research Project. Thank you very much for honoring this invitation to the Africa Science Dialogue podcast today. Karibuni sana. How are you feeling today?
Thank you for having us here at ICE Africa.
You're welcome.
I appreciate being here.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mutuma, to start with you. If today I'm on a matatu, on a trip to my hometown of Nyeri, and I buy a soda and throw out the plastic bottle, I know from my primary school teaching that it's not good to do this. It's going to make the environment quite dirty. But then, apart from that, how is it harmful? How is that plastic coming to hurt me back in the future?
Okay, I can say that you're one person throwing only one bottle. But if the entire 80% of the people, for example, if they throw all the bottles, ultimately we'll have more plastic waste generated. And of it, in Kenya, for example, only 9% of it can be recycled. The other 12% will be burnt, and the remaining will be put in a landfill, like, let's say, Dandora dumping site or Mwakirunge. And with time, these plastics, they break down into tiny, tiny particles. So if you dispose it and it finds its way in the water stream, it will get into tiny particles, which will get to the water. You're likely to get some water from the river. That means it will start affecting you. We start consuming the small parts of the plastic. If it's the animals or rather the species in the water, they can digest it. Some can die, others can get on your plate. And then also, if, for example, it burns, that means you're looking at carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide emissions, which you actually breathe. And definitely it affects your health. So by the end of the day, whatever you throw out has a way of coming back to you, either through the water stream or through the air stream, or even from the soil itself, the crops that you eat.
Yeah. And I was having this discussion with my namesake, Peter, who also plays golf, that every single time you're talking about conservation and you're talking about the environment and you're talking about climate change, the first thing that rings in the minds of nearly everybody is trees. Plant trees, they're carbon sinks, they're also good looking, everything, plant trees. But how do plastics also come in when we think about conservation and climate change? And what else can we think about apart from, of course, basically trees?
Right now, there's a lot of advocacies on climate change. And the first thing that comes to many mind is, if you're talking about climate change, then plant trees. But the trees are good, and it's one of the mitigation measures for climate change. And trees will act as sinks for carbon dioxide, which is one of the main greenhouse gases. So to be able to understand this, then many people need first to break down what is climate change. And climate change is basically the change in the weather pattern that we have seen over a long period of time. If we take the three major parameters associated with climate change, we are looking at change in rainfall pattern, change in temperature, change in our temperature, and humidity. Over the last 100 years, the Earth has become warmer by 1.1 degrees Celsius. I mean, Rimuru is not as cold as it used to be. On Nyandarua, they don't plant pyrethrum as they used to do. Other crops that are not tolerant to cold still grow there. So we can first understand the basic concepts of climate change from understanding what climate change is before we come to the mitigation measures such as planting trees. Then we would want to connect what is the effect of plastics. As Dr. Ntuma has mentioned, the plastics will find their effects back to the environment through the emission of the greenhouse gases. Yeah.
Okay, so coming back to Dr. Mutuma, now, this discussion that we've had about 75% of all plastics that are produced finally going into the environment as part of waste, as pollutants. Do we stop producing plastics? How do we go about this whole thing?
I think we can't run away from using plastic. Plastics are important material. Take, for example, in the medical field, you can't do without plastics for surgeries. But the bottom line here is proper plastic management in terms of techniques that can be able to not emit carbon dioxide gas, for example, or greenhouse gases. So we are looking at the likes of adaptive recycling, or you're looking to using renewable energy sources. You're looking more into applying new technologies in handling this plastic waste. So, for example, you can convert the plastic to a useful value-added products that someone can use in their houses for different things. Yeah.
And is this problem specific to a few parts of the world, a few countries? Do you have this problem where you say that Africa is not one of the biggest polluters but suffers most? Do we also have a similar situation when it comes to plastics, and the plastics that probably get as a continent and the plastics that go into waste? I mean, is this problem very, very visible in some places more than in other places in the world?
Plastic waste is a global problem.
Okay.
And globally, the plastic waste generated is high, of which 3% of it contribute to the greenhouse gases emissions. Even Africa also does contribute to greenhouse gases emissions.
Yeah.
As long we are plastic consumers, basically, so our emissions are more on the waste side than on the production side compared to other developing countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a problem that is disintegrated. It cuts across.
Yes.
Globally.
Okay. Now, namesake, when you've been doing what you've been doing at the coast, the microplastic pollution along the coast, the studies of what's the most interesting thing that you found out during that time that really ties to the people at the coast? Like, definitely I have a feeling that the whole pollution affects the people who are nearest where the pollution happens. But what's this most interesting statistics that you found that can help inform the country on what not to do in relation to what the coast has been doing?
As you mentioned, the plastic that is thrown away, and about 65% of the plastic waste will be discarded into the landfills. Once it is discarded into the landfill, into the environment, it breaks down into smaller particles, the microplastics and the nanoparticles. These small particles find their way into the water streams, and they are dropped down into the oceans. They continue to break down into smaller pieces, which are ingested by the marine organisms, including fish. So the plastic that you threw out of the window, in the car, in the house, wherever you are, will come back to you on your plate in form of microplastic. You threw a bigger plastic, but it's coming back to you on your plate in form of microplastics. Yeah. Microplastics have adverse effect on human health. They have been shown. Latest research have shown traces of microplastics in human body, in the brain, and in the uterus for expectant mothers. So these are some of the adverse effects of microplastics into the environment.
And do you think now, when you say it that way, it sounds like it's a pretty scary thing? If you told somebody who did not know exactly what plastics can, that they can boomerang, come back to you and cause this kind of effect, do you think there's enough awareness being created about the effects, the adverse effects of throwing plastics and how exactly it can harm you and your neighbor and your cattle and everything else in the future?
There's a lot of ongoing efforts to sensitize people on the effects of microplastics, of plastics. However, plastic pollution is an emerging pollutant. We did have plastic for a longer period. So plastic pollution is emerging, ideally because of the longer period that plastics take to decay. So it was not an environmental concern a few years ago until now. Even you look at the number of people who have done research on plastic pollution in the country, they are fewer. We have fewer publication on plastic pollution in the country. So there's need first to do the baseline to determine the extent of plastic pollution, and that is what we are doing with the African RISE program, the African Excellence Research Program by the African Academy of Science.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Mutuma, now you have a very, very rich profile, and I read through it, and you have a research interest in development of multifunctional hybrid nanostructures, as well as plastic-derived carbon nanomaterials. Are you able to break down to us what exactly that is?
Okay. My work is on, when you look at plastic waste, plastic is basically a material that is polymer that can be broken down in smaller units. So when you're doing synthesis in the lab, you actually purchase things from Sigma Aldrich, for example, or other chemical companies in the country. And whatever we purchase is an organic molecule of which plastic has it. So what you're doing, we are taking the waste that has already these molecules in it, and we are breaking it down into carbon atoms, small atoms, and then building it up to form a carbon material. So what do you mean by nanomaterial? Is a material that you can't see with your human eye. So if you take, for example, a piece of your hair, the thickness is approximately 100,000 nanometers. So you take one strand of your hair, divide it by 100,000, you get 1 nanometer. So we are breaking down those into such materials, and then we're using them to actually absorb pollutants in the water, and also to be able to capture these microplastics in water. So it's a circular way of actually using waste to generate materials that can be used to capture the same waste, which tends to address the issue of sustainable development goals like clean water and sanitation, as well as good health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Peter says, I don't think there are so many people doing that in such a way that if I went to my village today and asked around, who knows, I don't think even in the villages we even think about collecting plastics, just collecting them for recycling or for taking them back to recycle. I've never even thought about where those plastics go, by the way. In the villages, we just throw bottles anywhere. I don't see people collecting the bottles. Never thought about where they usually go.
Our economy is linear.
Uh-huh.
So in the sense that we produce and discard. So that's a linear model. What we are advocating in terms of management of plastic is a circular economy where we are reusing and recycling. Yeah. So if there are components of circular production, then we are going to recycle and reuse plastic. Then that will necessitate the need for collecting the plastics instead of discarding them.
Yeah.
So we should embrace the move from linear production to circular production, as a way of sustainably managing the plastic menace.
Yes, before I come back to you, because I have a question about that. Back to you, Dr. About what you said. Is it that we are not able to produce plastics that probably will biodegrade faster? Why do we, now apart from the fact that of course we have to go to policies that that ensure that there is better waste handling and management techniques, what about the plastics themselves? Are we able to produce plastics in the future that have characteristics that enable them to probably decay faster, or something, just so that we don't have as much pollution?
I think the plastic production is more, we focus more on the fossil fuels, like using the coal, oil, and gas to produce the plastics, which makes the degradability take a long time. But if we now focus on the green approach of using plant-based compounds to synthesize the plastics to become biodegradable,
Yes.
it is an approach of actually ensuring that we can control this. However, biodegradable plastic still cannot degrade in the ocean. So we have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
It can degrade in wells, but not in the ocean. So therefore, it's still an issue of managing the waste. By the end of the day, we can reduce that by biodegradable, but managing the waste is the key.
Okay.
Of it.
Okay, and back to the villages. That's why I said I was going to come back to you. We in the village, I have bought my whatever I buy in a plastic bottle, I threw it because I'm done with it. Of course, I also think that in the village you do a lot of reusing of some of these materials, but of course we have a lot of it getting dumped out there. When you speak about the water courses and the burning of the plastics and everything, I know this might not be correct, but it sounds like a mainly urban problem. Or is it? Like, for example, the bottles that we have thrown somewhere in some bin in the village, and probably nobody even thinks about them on the side of the road. Now, compared to the examples that I gave at the introduction, was phase at dump sites and plastics are being banned. And I know that's going to affect everybody once it's in the atmosphere. But then you talk about like the cost, and these people are drinking of that water. Probably, no, they're not drinking of the water, but they're eating the fish fresh out of there. Somebody in the village will wonder, myself here, how exactly is this coming back? It might boomerang, but not in quite a big way. So is this a more urban problem than, plus the fact that, of course, in the urban we use more plastic, we dispose of more plastic, we have more plastics in. Is it a more urban problem than a rural problem, I think?
Plastic problem is not localized. It is a global concern. So you'll not be spared whether you are in the rural areas.
I won't be eating the fish.
Yes. You won't be eating the fish, but the emissions from the plastics will find you in terms of 3.4% of the emissions of the global greenhouse emissions come from plastic production. 9% of all the plastics that are produced will be incinerated. All these effects will be found when we have all these will contribute towards climate change. And that will affect your weather pattern in the village, in your whole village, where you are planting 2 or 3 crop seasons. Now you'll be planting 1 crop season. So the climate change effects will catch up with you at some point, whether you are the producer or an emitter or a consumer. Okay. Then plastic waste is not just in form of the bottles. Many a times we just confuse plastic waste in form of bottles.
Just a bottle, yes.
Okay. 70% of all the plastics that are produced are mainly in form of packaging material. Okay. With majority of it being single use.
Yeah.
So most of the plastic is generated, it's used as packaging material. So not just the bottles, the PETs. And you're talking about the bottle, we are talking about the PETs, but you have also the other forms of plastic, the polystyrene, polyethylene, among others.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I think it was COP26 in Glasgow, and there was a whole discussion about how we're looking at temperatures of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And I think at the end of all this conference of parties, you find that there's no solid decision that is reached to the agreement of everybody, or there's a lot of push and pull. Do you feel like the one of the biggest problem is that it's not everybody who is willing to join this or jump onto this bandwagon of, like what you're saying, like a circular economy or something? Does it feel like the problem is being exacerbated because some of the big players just don't want to talk about this, or they're not really concerned about this, and why?
There is a feeling that the polluter base, so the people who pollute the more should pay the more. But as you're saying, the effects of climate change are felt across, and they are more severe even to the developing countries that are not emitting the most, like the sub-Saharan Africa. Our emissions are low, but the effects of climate change hit us most than even the high emitters like China and the US. Therefore, climate change discussion affects all of us, whether you are an emitter or you are suffering from the consequences of climate change. Yeah.
From this discussion, what I'm getting is we have to live with the plastics, and we just have to know how to treat plastics with more decorum or respect, or however you want to put it. I'm wondering, Dr. If you say so, then are we going to get to a situation where do you feel like it's a silver bullet for us if we get into a situation where everybody is in agreement that we have not been doing the right thing, and ultimately we should go more into the the circular economy, or will it get to a point where we have to think about reducing the production of plastics? Because I get what you said about biodegradability, but I'm thinking, is everybody agreeable to this immediately? Is everybody aware of what we should be? Will it get to a point where now we have to take action that is quite radical and say, now, no more plastics, like we did with Kenya, the plastic bags and everything? Do you feel like it's going to get to a global situation where we have to reduce the production of plastics? And is it going to be tenable? Is it a tenable thing to expect or to get to?
I think when it comes to the global approach, it's a multifaceted problem because it depends on different countries and their strength in terms of production and manufacturing. So that we can't have a cut cross answer in terms of a solution for all. But when you look at single-use plastic, for example, there are measures that different countries have taken. Like Kenya from 2017, they banned the use of single-use plastic, and also 34 other African countries, they have banned that, and other countries are coming on board. And that actually ends up reducing the plastic waste generated by 80%. So we are getting there by taking measures that can cut the kind of plastic that pollute the most. And also looking into the other approaches can be used. For example, the recycling approach, I think it's one of the key areas that we're looking into, and more looking at things that can replace plastics in areas that it's replaceable. For example, glass bottles, the use of wood, the use of materials that can easily replace plastics in areas that it's quite obvious that we can do that.
Yes, yes, I get that. Now, will this be more of a policy issue or just awareness? Because, for example, you can enforce, like Kenya enforced the single-use plastic ban, and you could as well not put it as a ban out there. You can go and tell people, no, this pollutes this much, and so we need to do. Will it be a policy issue, or now have to force people to go one way? Or do you feel it's a more of an awareness thing that people don't do this because they don't really understand it? And if they understood it more, like he explained about how it boomerangs, comes back to your plate, that people would take more caution?
I think it's both, but the first priority is on awareness and behavioral change, because when there's a change in behavior, you actually dictate to the market what you require.
Yeah.
So if, for example, you do not purchase water in plastic bottles, the market industry will have to adapt to your need. So which is actually more influential than just the policy. Of course, the policy cuts across multinationals, which applies now to the bigger picture. So, for example, looking at extended producer responsibility, such that those who produce plastics take the responsibility for its management for the entire life cycle. So that looks more into the production companies and making sure that they are responsible. But now from our perspective, you need to change. The behavioral change is key, and the awareness is key. Because if you tell your grandmother that these plastic bottle that you're using to take water ultimately will affect you, definitely she's going to say, I need a cup. Please give me your water in a normal enamel or a glass.
Yeah, these are just not part of the but there's a common belief that I found someplace where people just cannot have been fed into believing that every single plastic cup can cause you cancer. Plastic carcinogenic materials and all. And do you think that, okay, it's very alarmist, sounds extremely alarmist. If like a layman asked you, is it true that I should stop using plastics? Because they're going to cause me cancer someday, and there's so many cancers that people say they're unexplainable. So probably it's because you're using a plastic cup at home and you're drinking hot beverage on it. Is this something you would want to tell people? It's going to sound alarmist. Do you think that people have to resolve to this kind of you take advantage of people's beliefs? I don't know. It sounds pretty unethical if you ask me. But what do you think you need to tell people at this level? Do you need to educate them and tell them the truth about plastics and carcinogens, or just ride on that wave and be like, yeah, of course, this means we are not going to use plastics?
I think I'll take the approach that was used for baby bottles, like the bisphenol A containing baby bottles. They were prevalent, and then there was this movement about eradicating them. The baby bottles that have bisphenol A, which is carcinogenic.
Yes.
So it was an approach. It was, of course, a movement, but it has affected so many people and had an effect, a positive effect in that regard. So one thing I can say is, of course, you don't put hot things in plastic, because by default, it will, of course, you're having some breakdowns, though it's not, currently we are still looking at the evidence, but it's something that you can just want people to just be aware, but not pass it as a rule. You want to pass it as a rule.
Yes, yeah. I'm thinking of writing on that because yes, like the plastic baby bottles you're talking about.
Yeah.
And definitely, I think what people run with is that every plastic bottle, therefore, or like, I don't want to risk because there is one that probably has, been proven to have carcinogens or whatever. And can you run with that? Do you feel like it's something you run with and tell people, okay, fine, you heard about this, so don't you even try? Is the way to go?
As Dr. Mtuma has mentioned, we have different types of plastic that are made from the different polymer types.
Yes.
Like the bisphenol A, that is carcinogenic, that was used in the baby bottles. But you also have others that have not been classified as carcinogenic. We have the polystyrene, polyethylene, that have not been categorized as carcinogenic. So we cannot therefore apply that bracket condemnation. Okay. So I think this is where science meets with ethics.
Yeah. There has to be an element of, because if you want to achieve a goal, then you will ignore the fact that some of them have not been classified and just run with it.
Yes.
Because you need to think.
As scientists, we have an obligation to be bluntly, but equally try to simplify these complex scientific findings to a language that my grandmother in the village would be able to understand.
Yes.
Okay. And the language you're using here is that, yes, we have plastics, we can't do away with them, but we can sustainably manage them so that they don't pollute our water, they don't pollute our air, they don't contaminate our soil. And this, that kind of an approach, because overall we have to protect our soil, that is our land, we have to protect our air, the atmosphere, and we have to protect our water.
Yes.
And by minimizing the entry of plastics into the spheres that I've mentioned.
Yes. Now, with the current production of plastic waste per year, and without changes to policies, probably current policies, it's projected that the global plastic waste generation could triple by 2030. 2050, 2060, or even be more, as you had earlier mentioned, probably billions of metric tons. Do you think this is a winning battle? Like, the promotion of upcycling and everything else that will prevent. Do you think you in a winning battle?
I think we are making sustainable development. Kenya as a country is leading at the front with the 2017 ban on single-use plastic. We also have the international conventions, the Paris Agreement, the Basel Convention, the Kyoto Protocols, that holistically address the use of all these plastic materials and the effect in terms of net emissions. We are making little progress, but more needs to be done. We need to have a specific treaty that addresses plastic pollution. Plastic pollution so far is addressed as clauses in other major conventions.
Okay.
So in Paris Agreement, majorly focuses on the emissions that control the temperature rises. Basel Convention mentions about plastics, but the Basel Convention mostly deals with the movement of hazardous material. So plastic is kind of hazardous, but it's not very clear on plastic pollution.
Yeah.
The Kyoto Protocol mentions about emissions, the control of emissions, a more bracket approach. But you need to have treaties and conventions that purposely focuses on plastic pollution and plastic emission.
Okay.
Yes.
Before I'm done with you, why do you think plastic is just mentioned just in passing?
As I had mentioned earlier, it's an emerging pollutant.
Okay.
A few years ago, we didn't have plastic waste as a major concern. Right now, it's one of the most emerging pollutants of concern.
But I'm wondering, why?
You can relate when growing up in 90s or 80s, plastic waste were not all over.
Really?
Yes. But right now, it's an eyesore everywhere. So 20, 30 years ago, plastic pollution was not a major theme. Right now, it's now a pollutant of concern.
Okay.
Okay, that now needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said this increase is exponential, so which means in the next many years.
In 1950, we were only producing about 0.5 million tons of plastic. Right now, we are producing 400 million tons of plastic annually, and that's globally. Okay, so you look at that growth; it's exponential.
Yeah, it's crazy,
and it's projected to even triple.
Yes,
in the coming years.
Yeah. So, doctor, with all this in mind, it sounds a little bleak. But what next?
I think I'll go back to science, looking into the modern ways of tackling these plastics, and also generally addressing climate change. That is adapting renewable energy sources, like in Kenya, the wind, the solar. I mean, in terms of those who are manufacturing plastics, when they adopt those renewable energy sources, actually it reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that is emitted to the air, which saves on reducing the implications of global warming. Looking also into adapting recycling techniques that are modern, which will be guided by research and development. So, for example, the Africa Academy of Science is supporting research at the University of Nairobi, whereby we are looking at one way of solving plastic waste management by applying nanotechnology. And this is a project that is funded by the European Commission in partnership with the African Union. So that means we are looking at it not only in Kenya, but from a global perspective. So if we embrace, for example, research and development, then on the other side, we embrace public awareness. Then on the other side, we embrace a circular economy. We can be able actually to reduce the plastic wastes, that like manage plastic wastes effectively and reduce CO2 emissions, and also avert the climate change that is happening currently, reduce the global warming. So it's a multifaceted approach that requires all partners.
And yeah, I hear you. Last month on 11th of February, we had the International Day of Girls and Women in Science. And it's quite a pleasure because we have had 3 women guests here and only me and you. probably brought that. And so to a young girl who probably wants to study, do you say generally, what do we call the area of study? Just chemistry?
Chemistry, nanotechnology.
Nanotechnology. Yes, for a young girl who wants to study that and wants to get into this field, what will you tell them?
I think I'd like to tell them the science is beautiful. Girls are told over and over again the science is for men, but this narrative is changing over time. That science is beautiful, and especially pursuing chemistry, it's the beauty of all things, that she should pursue her goals and not abort her potential. There's so much when you find something difficult, you want to live it out and say, I'm going to live it out. Let's not abort the potential, so the future is bright.
Yes, and I think that will also apply to the young boys. I talked about the girls because of the significance of the days that we've been observing and honoring our women who are in science. Because I was reading through some of the things you've done, and I think this is something a lot of the girls should see and learn about. We grew up in high schools where we were told that sciences are boys. Subjects. I was in a high school where if we were beaten by a girls' school in science, we really got walloped back in school, and it wasn't the most interesting thing. And for you, I'm very much interested not only in the golf, but also in your activities along the Kenyan coast. So should I eat that fish?
There's a lot of work that we are doing. The first major thing that we want to do is to set a base right. We want to first identify, do you have plastics in the smaller plastics? We are calling microplastics and nanoplastics in our ocean. Then the science will dictate to find how much of microplastics do you have in our oceans. Then the next thing that we want to find out is which types. Okay, which type based on the polymer that are found there. Then you also want to investigate the prevalence. Are the plastics in on the surface water? Are they in the sediments? Then we have also colleagues who are looking at, are these plastics in microorganisms, are in organisms like fish and the other aquatic animals. Then at the end of the day, we definitely be able to advise the country
to tell us if to eat the fish or not to eat the fish. It's very important when you have scientists out there. And one thing that we do with Africa Science Dialogue is try to tell people that a lot of these things you will not know unless science comes in and, goes out and does the research and gives you the findings. Like, for example, with what you're talking about.
Absolutely, Peter. And if you check the Indian Ocean, which cuts across the larger part of the African coastline, is the least studied ocean.
Okay.
So in terms of our scientific expedition, the West Indian Ocean is the least studied part of the oceans in the world. The Pacific, the Atlantic, they have well been studied. They have a well-established baseline. But the Western Indian Ocean, which runs across the coastline of Africa, remains the least studied ocean. So we don't have a lot of data.
And why?
Because of the scalability of African research is still a bit raw. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done. And when we are still at the plastic pollution, maybe just to give our viewers perspective, across the Pacific, there's a huge patch of plastic that is floating in the ocean, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, that is equivalent to the size probably of Kenya and half of Uganda in terms of size, 700,000 kilometers squares.
That's scary.
Bigger than Kenya and probably can cut half of Uganda. That's floating mass of microplastic in the Pacific, of plastics floating in the Pacific. That gives you an idea of plastic pollution in the ocean. Wow. Okay. And most of our time we spend on land, but ideally we are talking about 70% of the earth is water.
Yeah, it's water.
So a lot of life, therefore, in terms of mass, is around the ocean, which we are relating with plastics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of need to do research in our oceans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They still remain understudied.
Understand, yeah, there's this whole discussion of how we are aiming to go to Mars and other places, of course, which I'm very excited about. But in the aquatic regions of sea, we really don't know much of what is going there. We're just throwing plastics without. It's gone, we just don't. Dr. Mutuma, what do we expect having from you in the next maybe many years? What are you probably working on, and what do you think the future is as bleak as a mass of plastics that's the size of Kenya and half of Uganda? What do you think the future is like, and what are you probably working on now that we can look forward to?
I think I like addressing the problems with the scale that we can be able to address the problems too, especially in Kenya. So what we are doing at the University of Nairobi through the Africa Research Initiative for Scientific Excellence, we have a team of around 7 of us, and we are trying to make use of this plastic waste in a good way. So we are converting it into materials and using them actually to clean the water that you drink, and also to sense pollutants in the air. And within the next couple of years, the idea here is to scale the whole thing to be able to have an impact, not only in Kenya, but also in Africa. But of course, it requires for collaborations with the industry as well as with the ministries to ensure that these addresses to policy by the end of the day.
Wow, okay. Any parting shots?
While the team is focusing on technologies that will do remediation of plastic pollutants in nature, my team on the other side is working on setting the baseline of the presence of these plastics in nature.
Okay.
So we are collaborating through the same project funded by the African Academy of Science. So we are setting the baseline. We want to identify the levels of plastics in form of microplastics in fresh water and in the ocean. Then we see the pollution levels in terms of plastics across our different water sources. Then they will definitely loop in and propose effective remediation measures if there be any pollution.
Okay, amazing. Any last words? Anything?
Yes, I always have a very lovely party shot.
Hear that?
I like
I
to
hear
say.
that.
I had said half bit of it previously, but I just always say the abortion of potential is the death of the future. So even as we address this climate change, plastic wastes, if we abort the potential that Kenya has, that Africa has, that village girl, village boy has, then the future is dead. So we need to keep encouraging, especially the younger generation, not to really give up, to keep pushing and doing the best they can in their little way. Because just like the hummingbird, a small drop of water can help in the long run.
Wow. Oh, amazing. Thank you very much. Here at ISA AfriCenter, we say, you cannot boil the ocean. Well, we haven't tried. We just boil the little we can. And there's one of my finalists today who is working in the oceans. He can tell us it's true you cannot boil the ocean. We've had a very exciting discussion about exactly what we need to do for a secure future in terms of climate change. We're going to have a lot of plastics coming to be with us in the future. That's billions of tons of plastics being produced because we'll need them. The best thing we need to do now is know how to handle our plastics. Handle them with care, handle them with respect, handle them knowing that they boomerang. They'll come back to us if we mishandle them. Very exciting insights today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us, my guests, Dr. Mutuma, and my golfing namesake, Mr. Peter. And I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your time as well for viewing us here at the Africa Science Dialogue, where we keep the discussion on science going. Until next time, my name is Peter Theory.
Africa Science Dialogue, closing the gap between science and society.